And I would love to introduce Brittany Smith. She is the Policy Director at Data and Society, who is going to kick off this event. Hi, Brittany.
Hey.
Hey. Over to you. I'm really interested. Yeah, hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining our session on anti-racism within AI research. We are both really happy to be here and thankful to the CogX organizers for inviting us. There you are. Hi, Abeba.
Hey.
So let's start with introductions. I'm Brittany. I'm the Policy Director at Data and Society. We are an independent nonprofit research institute that advances public understanding of social and cultural implications of data-centric technologies and automation. And over to you, Abeba. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Abeba Birhane. I am a PhD student at the moment, a final year PhD student in cognitive science. And yeah, I research the topics of cognition, AI, ethics, justice, and so on.
Awesome, thank you. So for context and to recap our session, I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant, but I promise I will stop talking and ask a question to Abeba in a minute. So I organized this session because it's gonna be a journey. The veneer of scientific objectivity obscures our understanding of the harms that science has wrought against Black people and the responsibility that scientists have to engage with and remedy that harm. And we are seeing this play out in AI research to disastrous effect. Instead of engaging with the ways their positions in this field and the technology they're building are deeply implicated in racist institutions, some AI scientists are hiding behind scientific neutrality and objectivity. And this means that we're bound to repeat and exacerbate the harms that science has wrought rather than preventing or remedying them. And science, by this I mean people, institutions, methods, and disciplines have a long history of legitimizing and perpetuating racism. Many people have written about the number of prolific scientists that took on the pursuit of the denial of Black humanity as their life's work through the development of new disciplines, the credibility of scientific endeavor, and the platform of scientific academies. They generated and spread a rationale for degradation that was so exhaustive and so thoroughly integrated into society, we are still unpicking it today. 400 years of transatlantic slave trade was made possible in part through the role that scientists played as willing collaborators in the project to justify the theft, rape, exploitation, torture, and ownership over Black bodies for profit. And race was constructed after that exploitation began. And this order of work is really important. So I'm gonna say that again. Race was constructed after that exploitation began. White people needed to justify the simple economic truth that free labor is better than paid labor. And scientists were more than happy to oblige in the effort to use their methods and disciplines to generate racist facts that could underwrite the pre-existing policy and institution. And so let's take a look, for example, at Ronald Fisher, a Royal Society fellow and father of statistics, a genius who almost single-handedly created the foundations of modern statistical science, who also just happened to be a prolific racist, who set out to prove that groups differed in their innate capacity for intellectual development. And today, the Royal Society acknowledges that his views are seen as far more problematic, but he was racist even by the standards of his own time. He died in 1962. It's a low bar to clear. And by the way, like, this is off notes. People say this all the time, like about take somebody like Thomas Jefferson. Like, he owned slaves, he's a bad person. But people are like, oh, everybody owned slaves back then. No, unless you were a slave, like, it was bad. It was bad back then and it is bad today. People like Ronald Fisher are terrible people. And his fingerprints are present in modern day AI and ML research and the discipline of statistics. My point is not that we should never refer to this guy again, but that we should talk about him all the time. We should drag him every day. This history should be an important part of how we understand the state of AI research. The intelligence in artificial intelligence that people are so eager to recreate is itself, as Stephen Cave has pointed out, a value-laden concept whose ideological legacy is deeply implicated in the creation and justification of racial hierarchy. And pretending that doesn't exist, or that scientific methods used in the pursuit of the development and deployment of that technology means it's neutral or objective is, to put it gently, completely ridiculous. And so I am interested, and this session is about working on an anti-racist path forward. in which we finally agree that being not racist is the bare minimum. And to actually prevent harm, we need to name it, oppose it, and resolve to remedy it. This history teaches us that harm is the default setting. It is the foundation that this field is built on, and that racism is inevitable, if not for a concerted and dedicated effort to oppose it. And so with all of that said, I wonder, Abeba, given your perspective as a PhD candidate and as a Black scientist, why it is so important for us to have this conversation at the intersection of racism, science, and AI.
Yeah, what an opening statement. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, as you put it beautifully, it's so important to discuss it, to talk about it. And if we are to move forward in any way, in a manner, in advancing anti-racist science or anti-racist intelligence research, we have to go back to the past. There has to be some kind of reconciliation, some kind of accountability. And even then, I doubt, I doubt, the foundation is so ingrained with, racism, sexism, colonialism, and all isms. I doubt, if improving through reconciliation and accountability and, fixing little bits and pieces will get us, bring us to a big change. As Audre Lorde says, the master's tools, will never dismantle the master's house. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's good to make all these efforts, but the way I see it, there was this meme going around. So you have this like huge wall with a big crack. And as we are, adjusting, parameters here, doing a little bit there, debiasing our data set or whatever, we're like putting a tiny little tape on that huge crack. So maybe what we need is like, scrap it all and build, a brand new wall. But again, that seems maybe a little too utopian or too unrealistic, given, the current foundations that are ingrained in racism are so, they have such grip in not only, in the scientific field, but everywhere you look. So it's like trying to overthrow capitalism or, trying to get rid of Jeff Bezos or anything like that. It does seem a bit, unrealistic, but I'm hopeful for radical change in a way.
I am too. And I think that being hopeful is hard. It's really hard. And I don't think we owe it to anybody, right? To have like a hopeful conversation or a hopeful session. This is really hard. And there's not a lot of signs, I think, out there for optimism. There are some, but I think it's okay if that is the space that we feel that we're in with our work right now.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so,
yeah, but.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
I was going to shift. So I'm interested to know like how this is playing out in your own work, like how you're seeing these dynamics present in the research that you're doing and other spaces that you're participating in as a scholar.
So this is a ranting platform, right?
Yeah.
But I promise I won't rant. I also will try not to make it too personal. I guess I am in constant tension in trying to do work that is not constantly looking back, that is not constantly criticizing, but also work that is putting something forward, that is, also saying, here is, everything that's problematic, that's bad, but here is a way we can also do it better. But sitting at that intersection is really difficult because, first of all, critical work that kind of interrogates, historical injustices, that interrogates historical roots of, say, for example, intelligence or racism, is often discarded as, you know, dragging back or constantly looking back, and just like, you know, empty criticism that is not, you know, something. But I think it's really, this is the intersection. I mean, I think it's really important to keep, you know, going back. For example, as you mentioned at your opening sentence, at your opening speech, that race classification came about, emerged with a purpose. So one of the earliest classification of race came from, I think, a German scientist called Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in 1795, where he came up with five races completely arbitrarily, 5 human varieties. He called them Caucasians, Mongolians, Ethiopians, Americans, and Malays. And that classification that came about completely arbitrarily. Of course, that classification had a purpose. It puts the Caucasian, the white race, at the top, and that later, you know, justified colonialism, even Nazi genocide, forced sterilization, and the legacy goes on. Even now, under Trump's presidency, we see a variation of that, where this kind of race classification, even though it's very nuanced, was used to kind of justify immigration status and who can enter, you know, the US and so on. So sorry, I lost my train of thought. So what I mean is, like, going back and reviewing the roots of, you know, race classification and the development of the concept intelligence itself is important, because now, with the rise of, you know, AI research, machine learning, being able to do all kinds of magical things, unfortunately, people seem to lose their critical thought when it comes to claims that AI can do this or that, as if it's magic or God or something. What we are seeing is a reincarnation of, you know, discarded pseudoscience or ideas of intelligence and ideas of race science or racism that has been that has been discarded, but now under the banner of machine learning and AI, they're coming back. So I think it's really important to also to look ahead, but also to go back and look at the roots and analyze what we are doing. Otherwise, we keep repeating the same mistakes under different technology, under different names, and with different nuances.
I think that's exactly right. We are bound to keep doing this over and over and over again because we never intervened the first time around. We didn't have the language, we didn't have the power, we didn't have institutions or leaders who were willing to say, like, hang on a second, like, that is pseudoscience, like, that is nonsense. And so we are actually just, this is the tradition of this field. This is the tradition of the disciplines that we are using. And I think it's unreasonable to just expect that they will naturally evolve somehow. This is their reason for being, is to create hierarchy and to solidify that hierarchy in political institutions. So it does not surprise me that that is your observation, like, as you're working in the field.
Exactly. And I mean, you know, eugenics was like state of the art, you know, discipline back in the like 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe even 50s. And now it gradually, you know, especially with the rise of Nazi and eugenics being, you know, a justification for, you know, so much horrible stuff, it kind of went out of fashion. So people started to look down on it. So it's somehow died, but it didn't really. It just changed name. So people don't study races, or it's not race sciences anymore, but it has evolved into, you know, scientists using different terminologies. So people now don't really, you know, overtly study races, but they study, you know, population differences, or they study diversity. So it's just like they are tweaking, or much of the discredited science. It's tweaking its terminology, its use of words, and still persisting. And of course, still at the heart of it, the objective of classification is always to give power and to put certain groups and certain races at the top of hierarchies, and then others will know their places eventually. And this doesn't remain only in science; it infiltrates policy. It infiltrates, the schools, the education system, and you see it in various tests administered in schools. So it does have downstream effects. It's not just a question for science.
And you've tweeted about this a bit, like this reemergence of pseudoscience and how it's going by other names, and like doing like the really important work of calling that out and saying, hang on a second, like what are y'all doing? What is this? Like, do you see how if you start to use different language, it immediately and obviously is problematic? Like, can you talk to me a little bit about your choice to engage in a public way on these issues? Because it is vicious. Like, it's vicious out there. People are not nice when you point out, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think most of it's just, irrelevant. Yeah, I guess especially, at the intersection of race classification, gender classification, and, AI, computer vision, people are really excited, at least, say the computer vision community, for example, at least the hardcore vision scientists get super excited by, this shiny state-of-the-art neural network that can, generate faces. You can give it any description, or they would have classifications where you can choose, the face composition, whether the face will have hair or anything like that. So that kind of creation, that kind of creativity gets people too excited. Maybe they fail to see that what they are doing is really, just going back and, recreating race classifications that were deemed again and again and again deemed unscientific and harmful. Yeah, so it's a constant tension.
Totally.
By speaking out, you are often portrayed as, the Luddite, sometimes the nasty woman that is like getting under everybody's skin instead of contributing positively. So yeah, again, it's like it's a constant tension where I'm trying to contribute positively. But that's not possible when you are constantly seeing harmful science. Some of it you wouldn't even call science, for just engineering or just, application being introduced and being spread without any critical investigation or without any critical thought at all. And as I said earlier, when it comes to, shiny new technology, most people, even the AI researchers themselves, seem to lose their critical thought, their ability to critically analyze and to kind of look back and look at the history.
Yeah. So one question I have for you, and I have some notes on this for myself as well, because I've been thinking about this for a while, is what anti-racism can look like in this field. And I wrote this question specifically to preempt people asking, like, what can we do? And reframe it in a way that is less about me giving you homework and more about people expanding their thinking and questioning the constraints and assumptions that people in power put on our thinking in this space. And so I wonder, like, for you, like, what anti-racism looks like in your work.
Yeah, I know you have thought about this a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
Maybe you can go first.
Okay, sure. Okay. Yeah, I have the benefit of having written the questions and the answers. So yeah, that's a little unfair. But yeah, so I think that in the pursuit of problematizing a lot of stuff going on in this field and introducing anti-racist research methods and practices into our work, a lot of scientists and technologists find this idea super frustrating. They feel that as individuals, they are committed to neutrality and objectivity and integrity in their work. But Ronald Fisher believed this about himself too, even as he worked to bend racist ideas to his scientific will. And in my opinion, we can choose to learn a racist lesson from him, that institutions can be easily manipulated into preserving racial hierarchy, that excluding Black people from their ranks and working in earnest to degrade Black humanity is a totally fine thing to do. We could continue looking the other way while men of great power and influence use scientific tools to prove that the status quo is the natural order of things, or who attempt to use scientific tools to prove that they don't need to acknowledge any of this because it is scientific. Or we can choose to learn an anti-racist lesson from Fisher. It does not follow that just because your methods were objective, your outcomes are harmless. And it certainly doesn't follow that because your personal beliefs don't manifest in the things you choose to research. The questions you ask about society and the way that your research can be used for political objectives. So for me, practicing anti-racism in science might look like name the issue, oppose it, resolve to remedy it. It is more than being not racist. That is a bar some people cannot clear. But for those of us that have cleared it, anti-racism in science is more than just being not racist. Like, that is my minimum expectation for people that I interact with and that I work with. And I think to be even more specific, it's going to involve multi-billion-dollar corporations ending the pretense that they don't have the budget or the resources to create roles that can help them answer these questions. Like, how many of these companies have a senior research historian or a vice president of community engagement? In my opinion, that's an anti-racist act. That's an anti-racist hire. That's an anti-racist team and structure and way of working. Valuing that work, promoting it, putting it on par with other things that you consider to be technical. That work is also highly technical. That can be what anti-racism looks like for us who work in this field and inside of some of these institutions.
I absolutely agree with everything you said there. And I'll just add one point, which is that, this idea of, this delusion of objectivity and neutrality is like a whole big can of worms. Maybe we will, if we have time, we can delve into it. But it's very problematic, speaking scientifically, but also it prevents you, it prevents you from also looking at, toxic scientific environments themselves. If I refer back to, a personal experience where I was invited to be a member of this, super prestigious scientific community, and I looked at people, and most people are scientists who actively do racist research, and my response was that there's too many toxic people, so I can't be part of the community, and they were kind of like freedom of speech, and there is not much we can do about it attitude. I guess the point I want to add to your point is that if you want to kind of create and maintain an anti-racist ecology and an anti-racist science, it's not about all the things you listed, but it's also about actively excluding toxic research, actively monitoring and discarding problematic research that is either outright racist or that ends up being used and picked up by for racist purposes. I mean, the publication domain is where I promise I will not rant, but you just time and time again, you just see outright, racist papers being published. Recently, there is even a paper where they straightforwardly said that they were inspired by Joseph Galton, the eugenist, and to see that kind of, people, when this kind of research is published, people do, it does cause, an outright, and people do organize. Sometimes it's retracted. Even retracting that kind of work requires a lot of, time and effort. Most of that work is done, again, by minoritized communities who will be directly impacted by work, researchers that are, junior, researchers that are under precarious conditions. So even trying to retract that kind of work falls under people who are already disadvantaged, who already are, at the bottom of, the power aspect. So we have to actively, look out. It's not about doing anti-science research. It's also opposing people that are actively working towards racist research or maintaining racist research.
Right.
I
think that's so important. And the other thing I think that's difficult about this is that there's a lot of people who I think agree with us but don't want to say it out loud. I feel like a lot of people are gonna email us, text us, tweet us after the session and be like, yeah, that was awesome, I totally agree. But I'm like, say it with your chest. Like, say it out loud. It is not up to me all the time to be the one. It's not up to you to be tweeting and bringing racist trolls into your mentions all day, every day, because you're the one person who has the responsibility to call this out. Like, it is everybody's responsibility to be doing this work. And I'm not interested in a text message or an email from anybody who has not also said that same thing out loud.
Yes, exactly. And the more in a position of power you are, the more, you calling out racist research, problematic research can make a big difference. Also, the less you have to lose. Junior researchers, Black scholars, it's a constant struggle not to get bogged down and, get buried under this constant calling out of problematic research. It also really drains your energy and your time, so you are not able to do your normal research. Also, you are also at a risk if you are constantly, the unpleasant person who is always criticizing people. You are also jeopardizing your future career. So my point is, the more senior, the more in a position of power you are, the less you have to lose also personally. So and the more impactful your efforts, will have.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it reminds me too, as you were talking about how much time we have to spend on this, what Toni Morrison said about the function of racism being distraction. I have other stuff to do than to call people out all day. I want to get on with my work. You know what I mean? I have other things I'm interested in that I'm doing, but I cannot do that because you are passing off eugenicist pseudoscience as being the frontier of AI. So now we got to do this. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was also interested in talking a little bit about what we both think underlies the lack of engagement and harsh resistance to centering disciplines like history and decolonial theory in AI research. My point of view is that I'm not, expecting, I think when we have this conversation, sometimes what people hear is, well, I don't know that. My PhD is in this other thing. And now you're asking me to also be accountable for this whole other discipline. But that's not what I'm saying, right? I don't expect people to learn a whole new discipline overnight. But I am genuinely amazed by how quickly people can become experts in deeply technical things, but can't find time to read a book about slavery. Like, that's a choice. I used to joke about this at work all the time when I worked in a company, that if we decided to launch a rocket to the moon, the next day everybody would suddenly be an expert in space. But when we ask, like, oh, okay, like, how can human rights inform our research strategy? It's crickets. And so my expectation is that resources are marshaled in an effort to fill a knowledge gap. And right now, people in power don't even want to acknowledge that gap exists. I think that decolonial theory, Black feminist theory, it's every bit as technical and important as statistics, machine learning, neuroscience, biology, in this effort to transform society, which is what AI development is about. It is a means to an end that people don't want to discuss and can't even imagine. And by the way, like, before y'all come for me and say, I'm not presupposing that companies are the only sites for this kind of thinking, or that these methods need to be retrofitted into pre-existing power structure. I'm pointing out some tough questions that people ought to be asking these companies. The next time there's a breakthrough in AI applied to biological science, I would love to know how many historians were involved. Like, if knowing that that is a question that they need to account for, like, will change their behavior earlier in the research development process. So anyway, before I started ranting, the question was, what do you think underlies this lack of engagement on disciplines like history and decolonial theory and AI?
What you just said reminded me of what Ruha Benjamin said at, I think it was last year's ICLR keynote, where she called AI deep learning with shallow history or something to that effect. Yeah. And it's really deeply ingrained with computer science, machine learning, AI, these computational fields where, you know, the hallmark of progress or success is, you know, scaling up, moving fast, and, you know, getting to the next stage and speed. So, you know, the very idea of, you know, slowing down and going back and looking at the history doesn't really align with the way, you know, these fields operate. And so from the get-go, you have these like misalignments where, you know, these computational fields are all about like fast, you know, let's, you know, beat this benchmark and, you know, beat this state of the art and that, all that. And whereas, you know, slowing down and going back in history, you know, brings an element of, you know, reflection, an element of critical thinking, which would inevitably lead you to, you know, readjust your definition of science, readjust and reiterate your definition of objectivity. As you reflect and critically engaged in these concepts, you will come to realize that, you know, the idea of objectivity or the view from nowhere doesn't really exist. But what passes as objective or, you know, God's eye view is actually the view of Western white cisgendered male for most of the time. And with that acknowledgement, you are also forced to also acknowledge, you know, science is always done from a perspective, from a position. So it's, you know, important for everyone to acknowledge their positionality, and that creates a lot of you know, a problem for the status quo, because you know, you are asking it for reflection, for critical thinking, for reiteration and redefinition of, you know, its core, its foundation, and that would, of course, were that to happen, that would be a way of anti-racist research, anti-racist science, certainly in my definition, but also it might feel like, for those in positions of power, it might feel like they are already losing some kind of privilege, because, you know, that position or that perspective has been taken as the standard, as, the objective view that rules all, that's the universal that everybody has to abide by, whereas anything else is seen as deviant and outside and an outlier. That way, you know, it can be discarded. sorry, I'm ranting again, but I agree with you. It's going back in history and really reflecting and scrutinizing our conceptions of science is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And rants are very welcome in this session.
Yay!
So we are almost out of time, and we have decided not to do a Q&A. That is deliberate because I think, as I said already, like people, I think sometimes tend to rush to want to ask questions, and sometimes those questions aren't very good. I'm not here to tell you what to do or what to read. Like, let it marinate. Like, this should be uncomfortable. Like, the things that we are discussing are super complicated, and there are lots of other perspectives, by the way, too. Like what Abeba and I think is not the end-all be-all on anti-racism in science. There are so many people who have influenced my thinking that I feel supported by and nurtured by in this field. My former teammates from DeepMind, like Shakir and William and Verity, like so many people have supported me in thinking about this and make me feel excited about what we can do with this set of ideas. And so I wonder, like, if you have any concluding, like, or final thoughts like that. Like, I am personally, like, feeling, like, really full of gratitude to people who are working on this and calling these issues out and doing, like, the hard emotional and additional, like, professional labor to move this conversation forward. And so I don't know if you have anything similar that you want to end on.
Yeah, I agree with you on the gratitude. Yesterday, I read a research that came out where the finding basically was that privileged white men do have the worst grades. They score the worst in college, but they end up having the highest salary through connections. Through family and friend connections. And that made me, like, I was thinking about this going to bed after I read that paper and realized that it's not, when you are a minoritized research, it's not really your research that will that will make you, that will give you the recognition you deserve, but it's rather, we also need that ecology that, human nature means, we are much more trustworthy when we trust people when they come through people, when we know people personally. So what we need to do is to also, we have these various ecologies that we are creating for Black women, for African researchers, for various minoritized communities. So what we need to do is, like, support each other and expand that ecology and constantly uplift each other. And we have to, like, we know the status quo is not going to support us, so we have to nurture our own ecology. And like you, I'm also the little bit of success in my research I have is down to people looking out for me, people supporting me, people like Timnit, Reddit, and friends like Debraj, and so many others that I can't mention. So it's really important to pay forward and nurture that positive, supportive environment for this kind of research to flourish.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. And I am hiring a fellow to come work at Data and Society on anti-racism and science and tech policy. So thank you to Data and Society and to ACLS, because for me, like, this isn't extra work. This is my job, and that is such a huge privilege. So yeah, and thank you again to CogX for inviting us to come rant here about pseudoscience and anti-racism.